You're not weak, but you're exhausted from being someone who never had permission to rest. Exhausted from wearing the armor of normalcy, from smiling at work, listening patiently, saying, "I'm fine," only to collapse in the bathroom, the only place you still belong to yourself. You ask yourself, why do I feel so absent within myself, even when everything outside seems fine? The answer isn't in what's missing. It's in what was programmed inside you. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's exactly what's been happening. You think you have freedom, but your mind was domesticated before you even learned how to think for yourself. Most people aren't controlled by others. They're shaped, quietly, by guilt, by the fear of rejection, by the need to belong at any cost. What you call personality is often just the collection of masks you were taught to wear to survive. You don't act with authenticity. You react with conditioning. Early on, you learned that being acceptable matters more than being whole, and so the silent training began. Smile, be pleasant, don't confront, be useful. The more you obeyed, the more you were praised. But inside, something started dying. It's the scream of your real self, the one you exiled so your mask could be loved. Nietzsche wrote, "He who cannot command himself must obey." You think you're making choices, but in truth, you're just avoiding invisible punishments. The discomfort of rejection, the loneliness of authenticity, the terror of being too much. Obedience is no longer a choice. It became identity. You've adapted so well, you forgot who you were before the fear. In this video, pain won't be treated as weakness. It will be revealed as the map to something no one taught you to pursue: mental sovereignty. This isn't about healing the wound to return to normal. Normal made you sick. What you'll discover here is that your pain is the beginning of an internal uprising, a call to reclaim command over your own consciousness. It won't be easy, but true freedom was never meant to please. It was meant to awaken. Have you ever felt trapped by something you couldn't see? As if you were carrying guilt without a name, but it keeps following you? That's not random, it's psychic loyalty. There's a part of you still obeying rules written before you were even born. Emotional inheritances from your family, your environment, your culture. And that loyalty comes at a cost. You learned that being good means not causing trouble, that to be loved, you must sacrifice, that to deserve space, you must not disturb. But the real tragedy? You were conditioned to earn something that should have been yours all along: your own existence. You call it empathy, but in practice, it's chronic self-erasure. Erasing your anger, erasing your voice, erasing your autonomy. And the cruelest part? This behavior is praised. People say you're mature, peaceful, easygoing. But they don't live inside your mind. They don't see what you repress just to remain acceptable. Jung spoke of autonomous complexes, parts of us that act on their own outside of conscious control. They're born when trauma, repression, and guilt form an emotional intelligence that overrides your will. You think you're choosing peace, but really, you're just afraid to confront the fear of rejection. You think you're being kind, but deep down, you feel like you're betraying yourself again. That's why you feel tired even after resting. It's not physical, it's existential. You're not just tired, you're trapped in a performance you didn't audition for. And now comes the brutal truth. You didn't sabotage yourself. You were trained in not recognizing your true nature. You were internalizing obedience as virtue. Conformity became safety. Renunciation was sold as love. But now you begin to see. You're not just dealing with personal pain. You're carrying a psychic ancestry of silence. Your overgiving isn't altruism. It's an unconscious plea for permission to exist. And this is where the transformation begins. When you stop calling submission maturity, when you realize silence is sometimes a scream dressed in social grace. If any of this echoed inside you, if some part of you saw itself in this mirror, I invite you to do something brave. Write in the comments something you've never said out loud. It can be a confession, a memory, a nameless ache. This space is safe, not for comfort, but for recognition. And if this message resonates with you, follow this channel. We don't offer easy relief, we offer lucidity. There's a version of you that everyone admires. And there's the version you hide so deeply, it almost doesn't believe in its own right to exist. That's the trap. Carl Jung called it the persona, the socially acceptable mask you wear to function in a world that rewards performance over authenticity. It's the smile you practice when you're breaking inside. The "I'm fine" that protects others from your truth. The careful way you edit your emotions to not be too much. The persona is not inherently evil. It's a survival tool. But when survival becomes your personality, freedom becomes a threat. You've been trained to become predictable, to respond as expected, to think what you're supposed to think, to silence your instinct before it even rises to the surface. And the world loves you this way. Because predictable minds are easy to manage. Predictable behavior doesn't challenge systems. Predictable people don't start revolutions, not even within themselves. But here's the price. You become a stranger to your own inner life. You start to feel disconnected, not because something external is wrong, but because you've outsourced your identity to the approval of others. Every time you shrink to be accepted, every time you hesitate to express what truly aches inside you, you reinforce the cage. You think you're being smart, calculated, diplomatic. But what you're really doing is killing the wild truth inside. And then one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize the eyes staring back. That's when you realize you didn't lose yourself, you traded yourself. For safety, for praise, for belonging. But here's the deeper horror. The longer you wear the persona, the more you forget it's a mask. You start defending it, building your life around it, sacrificing your needs to protect it. Until one day, your soul starts whispering, "This isn't me." But by then, you're too entangled in roles, in expectations, in stories that don't belong to you. You've become predictable to everyone, except yourself. And what they call stability might just be the slow death of your inner voice. Jung warned us, the persona is a system of behavior that is partially dictated by society and partially by the individual's conscious intentions, but it always conceals the true nature of the individual. So when people say they know you, ask yourself, do they know your truth or just your persona? Here's the turning point. You don't need to destroy your persona. You need to stop confusing it with your essence. You can still function, still work, still navigate the world, but behind the scenes, you start remembering what you buried to become pleasant. You start reclaiming the parts of you that were too raw, too wild, too honest to be accepted. You stop asking, what do they want me to be? And start asking, what am I hiding to survive? And that question alone can start an internal rebellion. They told you to be strong, to keep it together, act composed, graceful, adult. But they never told you how much of yourself you'd have to kill to be seen as mature. What if I told you that the strength you wear like armor is actually a wound in disguise? That what the world calls maturity might just be trauma wearing a suit? You were never taught to feel. You were taught to function. You weren't shown how to hold your sadness, how to navigate anger, how to sit in your own chaos without shame. Instead, you were rewarded for repressing it. And here lies the lie. Repression was sold to you as virtue. You learned to bite your tongue, hold your tears, and label your silence as wisdom. You praised yourself for not reacting, for keeping the peace, for being the bigger person. But deep down, it wasn't peace. It was paralysis. What they called emotional intelligence was your nervous system shutting down from overload. You started believing that feeling deeply meant being unstable, that expressing hurt made you dramatic, that naming your needs made you selfish. So you did what all well-behaved children do when they want to be loved. You disappeared, emotionally, then psychologically, and finally spiritually. And now, your body walks into rooms you're no longer fully inside. You smile by default. You apologize for existing. You feel guilt even when you haven't done anything wrong. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that being too much is dangerous and being low maintenance is safe. But here's the reckoning. Every emotion you suppress doesn't vanish, it transforms. Anger becomes passive aggression, sadness becomes apathy, fear becomes control, desire becomes shame. And all of it keeps circling inside you, looking for a way out. Carl Jung taught that anything repressed doesn't disappear, it becomes shadow. And the shadow isn't evil. It's the collection of everything you had to exile in order to be accepted. So when you feel numb, when you can't cry anymore, when you don't even know what you want, that's not stability. That's self-abandonment. You became so good at surviving, you forgot how to be alive. But here's the truth that cracks the illusion. Real strength is not about control. It's about integration. It's not about silencing the storm. It's about learning to breathe inside it. Maturity is not about hiding your truth. It's about expressing it with clarity, not chaos. You were never too sensitive. You were just never taught how to honor your sensitivity. You were never too emotional. You were just surrounded by people too afraid to feel themselves. So now you have a choice: to continue performing sanity, or to finally reclaim your wild, aching, beautiful emotional reality. Because being emotionally fluent in a world obsessed with emotional repression is not a flaw. It's a rebellion, and it might just be the beginning of your healing. Silence is often praised. Don't say anything unless it's kind. Stay calm, stay polite, stay grounded. But what if your silence is killing you? What if the quiet you carry is not peace, but learned helplessness? Not wisdom, but surrender. There's a type of silence that is sacred, the kind that comes from inner clarity, from restraint born of wisdom. But that's not the silence most people live in. The silence most people know is survival. It's the silence of the child who stopped crying because no one came. The silence of the teenager who swallowed their truth to avoid conflict. The silence of the adult who chooses diplomacy over authenticity, again and again, until they forget what truth even sounds like. You weren't born silent. You were made to believe that speaking your truth would cost you love, safety, or acceptance. And so you learned to betray yourself, gently. To shrink in conversations. To nod when you disagree. To smile when something cuts you. To say it's fine when it's breaking you inside. You mastered the art of pretending. Not because you wanted to lie, but because you were afraid of what would happen if you told the truth. And here's the painful irony. The more you silence yourself, the more you reinforce the very system that invalidated you in the first place. You can't rebel outwardly if you're still obeying inwardly. You can't break free while protecting the cage. Carl Jung taught that the psyche seeks wholeness, and repression, including silence, creates fragmentation. Parts of you split off, truths get buried. And over time, your soul becomes a museum of untold stories. You may still function, you may still show up, but inside, you're fading. Every time you hold back a truth that matters to you, you tell your nervous system, "My truth is unsafe," and your body believes you. That's why your throat tightens when you want to speak, why your chest aches when you suppress your anger, why your stomach drops when you laugh at things that hurt. Your body knows, even when your mouth stays shut. But here's the radical shift. Your silence is not always a virtue. Sometimes it's a prison. Sometimes your silence is the echo of generations who were never allowed to scream. Sometimes your silence is the strategy you inherited from ancestors who had to survive. But you're not surviving, you're suffocating. And the truth? No one's coming to rescue you from that silence. You're the one who has to break it. You don't need to scream, but you do need to stop whispering your truth to yourself like it's a sin. You don't need an audience, but you need a witness, and that witness must be you. Because silence only becomes sacred when it's a choice, not a sentence. So ask yourself, what part of me have I been silencing in order to belong? What truth have I buried so deeply I forgot it was mine? Because if you want to rebel against what broke you, you'll have to stop protecting it with your silence. You've spent your life trying to hold it all together. But no one ever told you that what you repress doesn't vanish. It evolves. And when it returns, it no longer asks for healing. It demands control. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, or disown. But the shadow doesn't die. It waits, it adapts, and then it starts pulling the strings from underneath. You think your perfectionism is about excellence. It's not. It's your shadow trying to avoid shame. You think your overthinking is intelligence, but often it's your shadow avoiding emotional vulnerability. You think your detachment is maturity, but many times it's your shadow shielding you from abandonment. Every strategy of control you've developed, the routines, the defenses, the constant self-monitoring, is the voice of pain that was never allowed to scream. The parts of you that were ignored became architects. The exiled emotions built new systems, and now they manage your life from the basement of your psyche. The irony? The more you suppress pain, the more it finds clever ways to dominate you. You end up chasing control in every area of your life, not realizing that what you're really trying to control is the chaos inside. But here's the haunting truth. Pain that is not expressed becomes identity. You're no longer just someone who was hurt. You become the person who must not be hurt again. And that shift turns you into your own captor. Your choices stop being free. They become reactions. You avoid people who trigger you, not because you've healed, but because your shadow still bleeds silently. You choose partners who don't challenge your wounds so you can pretend they're not there. You pursue goals, status, or praise, not out of joy, but because the shadow demands validation to silence its shame. You are not broken, but you are possessed by the very parts you abandoned. And Jung was clear. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your shadow is not your enemy, but it will become your tyrant if you continue pretending it doesn't exist. This is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. That means meeting your fear and not shrinking, facing your anger and not justifying it, holding your shame and still choosing to show up. The shadow's revenge only ends when you stop pretending you're fine. Because wholeness doesn't come from light alone. It comes from integrating the darkness with awareness. You want peace? Then stop managing your life like a PR campaign for your pain. Let the rage speak. Let the grief rise. Let the desire you buried breathe again. Because what you've been calling control might just be the shadow's way of keeping you from feeling too much. And what you've labeled sanity might just be emotional exile dressed in discipline. Let that sink in. You give, you help, you listen, you support. And yet, no one truly sees you. You're the one others rely on, the one who remembers birthdays, makes the extra effort, sacrifices sleep, holds everyone else's pain like it's your job. You do it with grace, with warmth, with consistency. But inside, you're disappearing. This isn't compassion, it's martyrdom. And not the noble kind. The kind that slowly erodes your sense of self until all that's left is a functional ghost. You think love is earned by dissolving your own needs, that you'll finally be seen if you just give a little more, carry a little more, stay silent a little longer. But the truth is, no one can recognize you while you keep erasing yourself. This is the psychological role of the martyr, the one who trades authenticity for approval, self-worth for usefulness, presence for performance. You overgive because a part of you believes it's the only way you'll be allowed to stay. You serve because you think that's how you prove you matter. You care for everyone because, somewhere along the line, you were taught that your pain is less important, that your needs are inconvenient, that being strong means being selfless even if it kills you quietly. So now you wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor. You normalize your invisibility. You minimize your truth. And when someone finally asks how you are, you say, "I'm fine." But you're not fine. You're on the edge of emotional bankruptcy. You're surrounded by people who take from the light you constantly give, but never ask what's fueling that fire. You've built your relationships on imbalance and called it loyalty. But loyalty that costs your wholeness isn't love. It's self-abandonment. Carl Jung would call this an unconscious identity, an archetype that runs beneath your awareness, shaping your choices, your habits, your emotional currency. You've become the caretaker, the fixer, the reliable one. But ask yourself, when did I decide that I only deserve love when I'm useful? Who benefits from you being perpetually available, endlessly agreeable, predictably self-sacrificing? You're not bad for wanting to be loved, but you're hurting yourself by believing that love can only come through self-erasure. Because the truth, real love doesn't require your disappearance. You don't have to shrink to be accepted. You don't have to bleed to be worthy. You don't have to keep playing the role of the emotional savior in a script you didn't write. The first step toward healing is this: retire. Not from caring, not from loving, but from performing care as your currency for survival. From being emotionally available to everyone but yourself. From staying in spaces where you are praised for how much you give, but never asked what you need. So here's your quiet revolution. Say less. Offer less. Hold your energy like it matters. Because it does. And when the world tells you that you've changed, tell them, I just stopped abandoning myself to be acceptable. This isn't rebellion for show. It's the quiet returning to your own center, where no guilt can command and no silence can cage. You've obeyed long enough to guilt, to roles, to fears that wear your voice like a leash. So here's your challenge. Say no without explaining. Pause without apologizing. Rest without earning it. These aren't just acts. They're rituals of reprogramming. Tiny ruptures in the script that kept you tame. Ask yourself, who profits from my silence? Who fears my clarity? Then act, not to please, but to reclaim. Because as Jung said, individuation is becoming whole, not good. And wholeness isn't polite, it's precise. Break one cycle today, even if your hands shake. And if this video cracked something open, follow this page. Here, we don't chase comfort, we confront it. Leave a comment below, a truth you've never spoken, or simply say, I'm ready to return to myself. Because your mind isn't weak, it was just loyal to the wrong command. Until now.